It's estimated that at any given time, there are up to 90,000 missing persons, and that's just in the United States. Imagine if your loved one went missing. Is there anything that you wouldn't do to try and find them? This is Missing Persons, and I'm your co-host, Mike Morford. In every episode of Missing Persons, you'll hear about a person who disappeared and currently remains missing, as well as the efforts to find them. In some cases, there are clues to follow and leads to check on. In other cases, it's as if the person just vanished off the face of the earth. In each episode, you'll hear from someone that's desperately searching for that missing person. And whether they've been looking for 30 days or 30 years, the struggle to find answers is real. Will you join us and become part of the search for answers in these cases? If so, search for and subscribe to Missing Persons wherever you listen to podcasts. There are dozens of episodes available to binge on right now, and new episodes come out every other Saturday.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. Non-violence, truthfulness, righteousness, wisdom, simplicity, worship of the spiritual goal, sacrifice the ego, self-discipline, reading, contentment. The 10 principles of yoga have been followed, believed in, trusted, and echoed since at least 200 BCE. They have grown, even possibly changed over time, but the concept is always the same. By following the 10 principles, you bring positive ethical qualities to your life. Without positive qualities in meditation, inner peace cannot break through the chaos of the outside world. Yoga is very much a way to look within, calm the internal, bringing sense and calm to the external. But the external has a way of catching up to us. It seems sometimes that no matter how quiet your inner self is, the noises of the outside world can envelop us and deafen our senses to the peace we seek. Marcia Moore was an American writer, astrologer, and yoga teacher. She was an advocate for the dissociative properties of the drug ketamine. As Marcia sought inner peace, her external world seemed to crumble quickly, with malice and ill will. This is a tragic case of the missing and 1979 unknown death of Marcia Moore. Let's begin. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, Robert Moore, who was the founder of the very successful Sheraton Hotel chain, which was sold in 1968 for $200 million, and his wife Eleanor Moore, who was an artist, illustrator, and esotericist, had a little girl they named Marcia Sheldon Moore on May 22, 1928. Marcia had 3 brothers, John Moore, William Moore, and Robert Moore, who goes by Robin, who also wrote The Green Berets in 1965 and The French Connection, a true account of cops, narcotics, and international conspiracy in 1969, which inspired the Best Picture winner at the 1972 Academy Awards, and he wrote other books as well. At 19 years old in 1947, Marcia had found love and married Simon Ruth. He showed promise in his journey to be a future writer. 3 years later, the two packed up and relocated to Concord to start their little family, having 3 children. In 1948, Marcia gave birth to Louisa, known as Lulie. In 1951, they welcomed their son Christopher, and in 1953, they had another little boy named Jonathan, who went by Johnny. In 1955, Marcia, Simon, and their 3 children went to India. There they would study Hindu and esoteric religions. Marcia's mother, Eleanor, as mentioned, was an esotericist. The name esotericism began in Europe during the 17th century. Esotericism groups together various Western traditions and philosophies. In the early 20th century, occult and esoteric beliefs were rising in popularity. Occult lodges and secret societies were growing among people who had left behind all forms of Christianity. This boom in secret teachings and magic practices found eager and passionate followers in the mess of what was the interwar years in Germany. Then, in the 70s and 80s, the esoteric and occult community were now the New Age movement. The movement was a new age of love and light. It offered a look into what was to come in the upcoming era through personal changes, revolution, and healing. The most dedicated believers in this movement were the followers of modern esotericism. They held on to this religious view that at the core of its foundation is the achievement of mystical knowledge. In the 1960s, Hinduism made a wave through hippie culture. The philosophy in Hinduism is that everything living has a soul, and all souls are a collective of a higher soul, a supreme soul. Hindus believe in the infinite cycle of life, death, and reincarnation. The ultimate purpose is to reach salvation, which ends the cycle of rebirths to become part of the absolute soul. Hindus also believe in the universal law of cause and effect, karma. Gurus taught yoga, meditation, donning bright-colored clothes, listening to sitar music, and they taught the sensual, erotic techniques of the Kama Sutra. Hinduism is more of a way of life, or a family of religions since it involves various religious ideas. From History.com, in most forms of Hinduism, people worship a single deity, but they still recognize other gods and goddesses. Followers believe there are multiple paths to reaching their god. One fundamental principle of this religion is the idea that people's actions and thoughts directly determine their current life and future lives. Hindus strive to achieve Dharma, which is a code of living that emphasizes good conduct and morality. They revere all living creatures and consider the cow a sacred animal. Food is an important part of life for Hindus. Most do not eat beef or pork, and many are vegetarians. That is a brief overview of what Marcia and her husband were believers of, and they took the trek to India to soak up all the knowledge they could about it. When their expedition came to an end, they flew back to the United States in the fall of 1957. Marcia's senior thesis in college was published under the title Astrology Today, a Socio-Psychological Survey. In 1960, she graduated from Radcliffe College in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In 1961, Marcia and Simon divorced, and by the next year she wed 21-year-old Louis Acker, whom she had met through her astrology clique of friends. Marcia was 33 at the time, but regardless of the 12-year age difference, they were smitten for each other. It's reported that the biggest reason they got married was because their astrological signs were so compatible. Yet, they would go on to divorce as well after 3 years of marriage. Mere weeks after the split, Marcia ended up marrying her third husband, Mark Douglas. He was a Korean war vet and grifter. She was sure that she had met Mark in a previous life. Marcia and Mark would go on to live their lives together in Maine, where he created a publishing company as well as opened a food store in York Harbor. He encouraged Marcia to write books and to sell her work. He seemed great at first, but eventually he turned into a financially abusive nightmare. He took over Marcia's income from trust funds and stock that she held in her father's Sheraton Hotel chain. Then he began to get physically abusive, and Marcia dumped him in 1966 for giving her a black eye and other injuries. Unfortunately, Mark had already taken more than $120,000 worth of the stock Marcia held. He even took over her mansion, the store, and an apartment they owned together, according to the book Dematerialized. After she and Mark divorced, she made her way to California, where she would meditate and experiment with hallucinogenic drugs like LSD, and eventually ketamine, which Marcia called the goddess. She believed that ketamine would allow her to delve into her past lives. In the 1970s, she married her fourth and final husband, Howard Alltounian, who was a medical doctor. They traveled to Washington, close to Seattle, where the two settled down and planned to live the rest of their lives together. Marcia became an advocate of the drug ketamine with Howard, who was an anesthesiologist. Now, let's talk about ketamine and its effects from the website talktofrank.com/drug/ketamine the law. I'll also have a WebMD link that explains more in depth in the show notes. How does ketamine look, taste, and smell? Ketamine is a clear liquid when used in medicine. It's also a grainy white or brown crystalline powder when sold on the street. There are also tablets, although this is less common. Ketamine tastes bitter and unpleasant. How do people take ketamine? It's used in medicine as an anesthetic for humans and animals. Most people who take powder ketamine will snort it. Users often talk of taking a bump, meaning they snort a small amount of ketamine. Some people who regularly use ketamine sometimes inject it to get a bigger hit. They usually inject ketamine into a muscle. And as we'll find out, Marcia injected herself with ketamine regularly. Some people swallow it in tablet form, but this is less common. Some people bomb ketamine, which is when you swallow the powder when it's wrapped in cigarette paper. So how does ketamine feel? It's a general anesthetic, so it reduces sensations in the body. Trips can last for a couple of hours. It can make you feel dreamlike and detached, chilled, relaxed, and happy, confused, and nauseated. Ketamine can also alter your perception of time and space and make you hallucinate. It can stop you from feeling pain, putting you at risk of hurting yourself and not realizing it. If you take too much, you may lose the ability to move and go into what is called a K-hole. This feels like your mind and body have separated and you can't do anything about it, which can be a very scary experience. Keep that in mind. Regular ketamine use can cause agitation, panic attacks, damage to short and long-term memory, depression if taken frequently. Ketamine can make people seem slower, more relaxed, and chilled out, but it can also stop people from being able to move properly and from making sense. So how long does ketamine last? How long the effects last and the drug stays in your system depends on how much you've taken, your size, and what other drugs you may have also taken. When snorted, ketamine normally takes about 15 minutes to take effect. When taken orally, it will take longer, around 20 minutes to an hour. The buzz can last for around 30 minutes to an hour, but the effects really depend on how much you take. After the effects of ketamine wear off, people may feel down and their mood may be low for a few days after using. So how long is it detectable in your system? Ketamine can be detected in a urine test for several days after taking it. This also depends how much you take and which testing kit is used. This is only a general guide. So what are the risks of taking ketamine? Ketamine is a very powerful anesthetic that can cause serious harm. Taking ketamine can be fatal, particularly if it is mixed with other drugs. Ketamine can increase your heart rate and blood pressure. It can make you confused, agitated, delirious, and disconnected from reality. It can make you feel sick, and it can cause damage to your short and long-term memory. Because of the body's loss of feelings, paralysis of the muscles, and the mind's loss of touch with reality, you can be left vulnerable to hurting yourself or being hurt by others. Since you don't feel pain properly when you've recently taken ketamine, you can injure yourself and not even know that you've done it. Ketamine can cause serious bladder problems with the urgent and frequent need to pee. This can be very painful and the pee can be blood-stained. Although stopping using ketamine can help, sometimes the damage can be so serious that the bladder needs surgical repair or even removal. The urinary tract from the kidneys down to the bladder can also be affected and incontinence may also develop. Abdominal pain, sometimes called K-cramps, have been reported by people who have taken ketamine for a long time. Evidence of liver damage due to regular heavy ketamine use is emerging. The liver has a range of important functions, such as cleaning your blood and removing toxic substances. On the mental health side of things, the longer-term effects of ketamine use can include flashbacks, memory loss, and problems with concentration. Regular use can cause depression and occasionally psychotic symptoms such as hallucinations. Ketamine can also make existing mental health problems worse. Interestingly enough, though, medical-grade ketamine is now being researched as a potential treatment for severe depression, but it's too early to know the results of this research. Street ketamine is usually sold as a white-beige crystal powder and is sometimes cut with other powders to add weight and to improve the dealer's profits. It's impossible to tell whether the ketamine you buy off the street has been cut with other substances just by looking at it. Anytime you mix drugs, you know you're taking on risks. If you mix ketamine with other drugs, particularly depressants like alcohol, benzos, or opiates, you risk collapsing, passing out, and/or seriously injuring yourself. You could also choke, especially if you vomit. Ketamine can also be very dangerous when mixed with ecstasy or anything with amphetamines, also known as speed, as it can cause high blood pressure. If you take a lot of ketamine and mix it with other drugs, you could die. Of course, you can get addicted to ketamine. People who use it regularly can develop a high tolerance to it, which could lead them to take even more to get the effects they're looking for, just like any other drug. There are no physical withdrawal symptoms with ketamine, so ketamine addiction is sometimes called a psychological dependence. Ketamine is a Class B drug, which means it is illegal to have for yourself, to give away, or sell. Possession of ketamine can get you up to 5 years in prison, an unlimited fine, or both. Giving ketamine to someone else or selling it can get you up to 14 years in prison, an unlimited fine, or both. If you're caught driving under the influence of ketamine, you may receive a heavy fine, a driving ban, or even a prison sentence. With it being a Class B drug, if the police catch anyone supplying illegal drugs out of their home, at a club, a bar, or a hostel, they can potentially prosecute the landlord, the club owner, or any other person concerned in the management of the premises. That again is from talktofrank.com/drug/ketamine the law, which will be linked in the show notes. With an overview of ketamine, this is what Marcia was often taking and wrote a book that was published in 1978 called Journeys into the Bright World. In her book, she endorsed the pragmatic value and the fruitfulness one gets when taking ketamine, experiencing dissociation, and the potential positive effects of using ketamine with Jungian psychotherapy. Let's dive a little into Jungian psychotherapy from goodtherapy.org. Jungian psychotherapy concepts. Active imagination. Carl Jung created the concept of active imagination as a way to describe bridging the gap between unconsciousness and consciousness. Using imagination, fantasy, dreams, and meditation, a person is able to bring their unconscious into the present through narrative or action. Active imagination relies on the person's undirected observation of their imagination or dreams, not an intended image of their desires. Individuation. Individuation is a process of analytical psychology, by which an individual develops into who they truly are intended to be. Individuals with emotional difficulties often feel like they live fragmented, disjointed lives filled with varying degrees of emotional experiences. Forward progress is often impaired as a result of inner conflict and self-sabotage stemming from the segregation of the different selves within a person. Individuation involves integrating all of a person's past positive and negative experiences in such a way that the person can live a healthy, productive, and emotionally stable life. Individuation allows a person to become unique and essentially individual from other human beings and the collective unconscious. The process of individuation occurs through various methods, including dream interpretation and active imagination, and gives birth to a mature, holistically healthy, and harmonious individual. Collective unconscious. Carl Jung was the first to use the term collective unconscious as a means for describing an expression of the unconscious that is exhibited by every living being with a nervous system. Rather than only possessing experiences from our personal history or our psyche, the collective unconscious organizes all of the experiences within a species. Carl Jung believed the collective unconscious was inherited and inherent to each being, rather than just a result of specific events. The collective unconscious holds mental images that cannot be explained historically or through experience, but exist only as an evolutionary byproduct. Logos in Jung's theories. Carl Jung also used the term logos in his philosophical theories. Logos, according to Jung, represented fact or reason. He often referred to the contrast between conscious versus unconscious as logos versus mythos. Additionally, he believed that logos was the male version for rationality, where the female counterpart, eros, represented psychic availability or emotion. Nekia. Nekia, or Nekia, is a key component of Carl's analysis. Nekia, or the process of delving into the unconscious, is, according to Carl, a deliberate and decisive action. He believed that the process of delving into the unconscious is a dark journey into a dangerous place, and this is a necessary process by which to achieve individuation. Those who traveled to the depths of their inner psyche and back were far better for having done so. Carl's theories also influenced many of the assessment tools used in psychotherapy today. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI, developed by Isabel Briggs Myers and Catherine Cook Briggs, was based on the theories Jung explored in his book Psychological Types. This personality tool is one of the most commonly used measures throughout the world today. And that was from goodtherapy.org. Jungian psychotherapy is what Marcia believed was amazing in conjunction with using ketamine. Marcia, at the time a published astrologer and a psychic who believed she shared the same life with Cleopatra, was 51 years old when she mysteriously went missing on January 14, 1979. When Howard came home from work, not long after midnight, Marcia wasn't anywhere to be found. During the summer of 1979, the National Enquirer's headline about Marcia read, quote, "Missing scientist has become invisible and is somewhere out in the cosmos." Howard Alltounian told a reporter at the National Enquirer that he and Marcia had this picturesque marriage. Nothing could separate them, and he was taking a vow of celibacy until she came back reincarnated. However, according to the book Dematerialized, that vow of celibacy flew right out the window because right after Marcia vanished, he was dating again. Howard was even under investigation for serial rape, but he was never charged with any crime. In 1981, in the swampy woods right by her home in the suburb of Seattle, Marcia's remains were finally discovered by construction workers who were clearing a lot in Bothell, a North Seattle suburb. The county sheriff's office confirmed dental records were used to identify the skull, of which only the upper section was recovered. Authorities said there was no evidence of foul play, but at the time they were still on the hunt for the rest of her bones and more clues that could lead to what happened to her. When Marcia seemingly vanished without a trace, Howard said his wife had been taking 2 50-milligram doses of ketamine once a day for 14 months. He said they were exploring the forbidden zones of the higher consciousness. Howard, when speaking to the police the morning of Marcia's disappearance, said she had gone to the movies and never came back. Howard said that Marcia was upset, that she was a manic depressive and had acquired a mental disorder from her use of ketamine. He also stated that she had threatened to take her own life. The day after his sister was found, her brother Robin Moore told the UPI, quote, "I don't for 1 minute believe that my sister died a natural death. I think her demise was assisted, perhaps by a cult that we don't even know about. Marcia was targeted by these people on several occasions." Robin at this time was an established author, and he had just announced his candidacy for a U.S. Senate seat in Connecticut. Robin said Marcia told him in 1977 that a witch's coven was trying to murder her. He also said, quote, "The fact that her head was totally separated might possibly indicate that the head was severed. I don't know, but I do know that there are cults in which they behead animals as part of their ceremony." It's speculated by investigators that Marcia went into the woods and injected herself with the mind-altering ketamine, possibly a much higher dose than she should have, which could have caused her to suffer from amnesia, severe depression, and she could have gotten turned around and lost in the woods. The ketamine would have caused her to go unconscious, possibly into a K-hole, and it was so cold she likely passed away of hypothermia. Howard, 43 years old at the time, moved to Detroit, Michigan sometime between Marcia's disappearance and the time her remains were found. The specific date isn't clear. One would think he would be a suspect into her disappearance and death, but he never was even interrogated, and the home they shared together was never searched. Even though the lead detective of this so-called investigation had a hunch that Howard did this or was involved in some way. Marcia's niece, Elizabeth, said, quote, "I can recall my uncle, who is the executor of her estate, talking to my father and suspecting that it was the husband who killed her. There was concern, but no rage. There was not enough passion to find out the truth. They were all gentlemen, and they took care of business." The famous true crime author Anne Rule revealed that when Marcia's skull was found, there was a hole in it. It was speculated that this hole could have been due to being shot in the head, but investigators concluded that it was more probable that the hole was created by being in the elements for over 2 years. Marcia's actual cause of death is still not known. Anne Rule was quoted as saying, "Marcia's disappearance is probably the strangest case I've ever written about." Howard Alltounian passed away in 2006 of a heart attack at 69 years old. Oddly, Marcia's son Christopher Roof was living in Concord, Massachusetts when he went missing in August of 2010. Right before he disappeared, he had donated a lot of his mother's writings to the Concord Library in 2009. 2 years before that, he had donated his own writings. On a logging trail on November 4th, 2010, a hunter discovered Christopher's remains. It wasn't known at that time whose body it was, but that this person was believed to have died in early September. Besides the clothes on his back, there was a briefcase, which only held empty bottles of Dasani raspberry water, Poland Springs water, cranberry juice, 2 cans of insect repellent, and a brown sweater. Christopher was finally identified on September 20th, 2021, through DNA. His cause of death, as well as how and when he got to Maine, is all a mystery, and his death is still under investigation. In December of 2021, a friend of Marcia's niece Elizabeth, named Bentley, told the New York Post, quote, "A lot of things Marcia did was mortifying for the family. If she were alive today, she would have been an Oprah-like person. She was one of the first to bring yoga to this country, and likely the first person to use the phrase, Age of Aquarius. Some of her conclusions have also been proven right. She intuited things that are being studied more rigorously, such as the use of hallucinogenic treatments for PTSD. This is a list of books that Marcia Moore wrote in her lifetime. In 1960, Astrology Today, a socio-psychological survey. In 1966/1970, she wrote with her husband Mark Douglas, Diet, Sex, and Yoga. 1967/1979, she wrote again with her husband Mark, Yoga, Science of the Self. Again with Mark Douglas in 1968, Reincarnation, Key to Immortality. In 1970, she and Mark wrote Astrology in Action, an astroanalysis of Jacqueline Onassis. In 1974, with Robert Pelletier, Planets in Aspect, Understanding Your Inner Dynamics. In 1976, she wrote Hypersentience, Exploring Your Past Lifetime as a Guide to Your Character and Destiny. In 1978, again with Mark, she wrote Astrology, the Divine Science. And in 1978, with her then-husband Howard Alltounian, wrote together Journeys into the Bright World. Anytime people who know of this story pass by a Sheraton Hotel, they often think of the heiress Marcia Moore and her enigmatic, strange death. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Until next time, stay safe and take care.